All right, welcome everybody. We have Arnie dialed in by the phone. We are set for the next edition of the Minotaur Book Club, and we are going to be wrapping up our time with the Federalist Papers for this month, looking at a few selections and talking a bit about the Federalist versus the anti-Federalist portions of things. And let's see, quick reminder on sort of the sources of this. So the reason we call it the Minotaur Book Club is the Minotaur in these stories gives us a reflection of what happens when we misuse public power. So these are the selections that we are going to look at for today. First one, we'll probably spend 30 minutes or so on the nature of government and human nature, then looking at the executive powers, and then at the checks and balances. So there's a link in the comments on Meetup if anybody wants to go take a look at this deck to get the selections of it, and you can go look it up elsewhere. So these are a few of the points that John Robinson, who was with us last month but can't join us this month, and Arnie have pulled together that represent two countering views about each of the different topics that we have here. And so hopefully this will kick us off to a nice way to do that. Now, if I switch like this, do you guys still have the deck?
Yeah, I still see it. If you've
Yes.
switched anything, yep.
All right, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and kick it off and talk about the nature of human nature, or nature of government, and the human nature. Um, and Arnie had some good thoughts in here in his prep document that I'm looking at, just to get us started. But that, what we're dealing with was a question of should more power go to the states, and should we consider going from a republic more towards a direct democracy? And so this actually came up in a conversation I was having online with somebody else, and I was talking about democracy, and the topic came up of, we're not a democracy, right? And yes, officially we are founded as a republic. And the big difference between that, being not a direct democracy, we don't get elected to go into Congress and do things. And if we were in Greece way back in the day with a direct democracy, we would each rotate in and out of positions inside of the government and be responsible for taking care of certain things. And a republic instead is what came about during the Roman times, where we elect other people to participate on a full-time basis on our behalf. So they may still use democracy, but it's not a democratic government. It is a Republican government using the techniques of democracy. And I think we're seeing a bunch of that, right now. I think we're having a public debate about democracy versus republic. What is that like when we don't have direct interactions with our government? So James Madison in Federalist number 10 confronted the inevitability of factions as a consequence of human nature. And we will all have differing interests. We all have different selections where we come from. We all have different biases. And his suggestion there is that a large republic can actually mitigate the effects of bias. That by extending the sphere of governance, we're allowing to have more voices included in that governance. So if you think of things being a governance built around a single city or a single state, it's in many ways much more likely to be homogenous or closer to homogenous. And the more districts that we have involved, then the more likely there is to be more voices to give a counterbalance to this. And that is more likely to contribute against the possibility of oppressive majorities. So Madison also acknowledges human beings differ naturally in different faculties, ambitions, and capacities. And so the more difference that we have in who we are as human beings, leads to an unbalance and an unequal in outcome. And one of the things they were tackling there was a inequality, particularly in the areas of property and influence. So one of the quotes from Federalist number 10 is that the diversity in the faculties of men from which the rights of property originate is not less an insuperable obstacle to a uniformity of interests. There is a inequality in a natural is a inequality is a natural consequence of liberty, and that Madison makes a case that it's not a defect to be corrected by our government. So Madison argues that the role of the government is not to eliminate these differences, but to manage their effects, particularly by preventing any one faction from dominating others. And probably would say that Madison's proposal here is that it is only through having a larger government that we can then manage the factions. All right, so given the preamble's mission statements about the general welfare, concern for prosperity, so one of the questions that maybe we can talk about, or if you guys want to talk about something else, is have we gone too far today in what's the word for it? Decreasing the role of government, or is there any level of disparity in income, wealth, poverty, education, health, morality justified by the principle of liberty and the protection of property? So this could be one of our first topics here. We are naturally different, and we have different places, and we have different influence within our republic. And Madison's case is that if we did anything that's just a natural part of human nature, and we would be subverting maybe human nature if we didn't have some inequality. It's one of the consequences of liberty. So, any thoughts on that?
Well, just quickly, I would add the question is that theory of the protection of property and the greater fear of the tyranny of the majority by the founders over the possible tyranny of the minority, is that mindset, is that ideology, is that way of thinking still evident in the United States today? And does that contribute to some of our divisions that are taking place? Sorry, Laura. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that was fine. I guess what I was, and not to sort of just derail a little bit of what you were talking about, but I think what had, when he was talking about the difference between factions and being that expected, he also talks about, and I'm trying to recall a little bit since it's been a while since I read this one, so I've just pulled it up again. But one of the things that had struck me during the original reading too was that, he does talk about enlightenment, right? And that we just have to sometimes accept that enlightened statesmen will never always be at the helm, right? So the way that they're responding to the differing factions is just I think something else that is just an effect, right, of being within a republic.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense, but they also claim that these divisions by putting ambition against ambition and creating a divided government, the three branches of government, will help retain these factions and maintain a balance. How well is that working?
I think before we sort of split into that one too, I think it's also useful to keep in mind that when they started, the only people that could vote were people who were landowners who had a certain amount of money, and that their perspective was that the average person probably shouldn't vote, and that you should have like a level of I don't know, but a certain level that you need to reach before you are allowed to participate in the governance. And certainly these days, you have to have a great deal of money, or at least access to money, in order to be able to participate. So that kind of still, even though we've gotten rid of the barriers to voting and that anybody now can vote, we have probably in many ways made the barriers to participating as an elected official harder.
Yeah, agreed for sure. And not to mention, even if not even going so far as to be an elected official, if you have money, you have a lot more, say in politics, through other kinds of influence, ads, and well, all kinds of other ways, I suppose.
There's another set of notes that you had here, Arnie, about pluralism and the institutional safeguards, which I think is what you're getting to a bit about the different branches. But that there's a large republic is diverse enough to prevent majority tyranny while preserving individual liberty. And the object of liberty is the rights of those with greater talent and ambition to have unequal property or wealth. The founders' fear of the tyranny of the majority was greater than the fear of the tyranny of the wealthy. Can you say a little bit more about that? So you're saying that there was a greater fear of an uprising of the average Joe versus a fear of the wealthiest taking over and basically ruling over of the masses?
Yeah, I think the as you rightly pointed out, the founders were primarily owners of land and property, and they recognized that as a result of the natural differences in people's ambition and talent, that some people would rise to the top. They also recognized that people who were not so successful may not submit to the idea that they aren't successful because they aren't as talented or as ambitious, and therefore there was a fear of the majority uprising to take away the wealth of the elite, which is a continuing battle in American history and certainly evident today. That was where they came in with the difference between passions and rationality and self-interest, and they tried to get to the divided government in order to slow things down enough for the reason to quench the passions that would lead to active attempts to redistribute the wealth, but somehow the balance hasn't held. And somehow the inequality has gotten to the point where the Congress in particular, the power of the purse is not being exercised, and the president, even this week, is. I'm not getting political here. I'm just analyzing what happened. Ending the First Amendment by putting pressure on ABC and other facilities to fire people that say things he doesn't want to hear. He doesn't have that right under the First Amendment.
Yeah, I would push back a little bit against the phrasing of the ending of the First Amendment. The end of, even if it's not being enforced, the First Amendment is not going away and is still there.
I agree. You got to hold me back. That's you were an expert in managing difficult discussions, and my job is to challenge and see how good you are at it.
And just not to derail it, but I'm actually curious what people think. I just skimmed it recently, and it was like, oh no, it says Congress shall make no law. Like says nothing about the executive branch taking no action to inhibit free speech. Like, is this like a flaw?
The Supreme Court ruled that it applies to all levels of government. The president does not have the right, according to Supreme Court rulings.
Fair enough, but yeah, now the Supreme Court could change its mind on that. It's anyway, but not to derail the conversation. I'm just that is a good, interesting point, though. Thank you.
Yep. I think again, it's like checks and balances, which I think we're going to come back to in the third section. But yeah, like I think the intent was like elsewhere, as I best recall, only Congress has the ability to write law, and the only scope of the president is to execute and enforce that law. So therefore, it was assumed that the executive branch could not take any action that was not already covered under a law, and since nobody else but Congress has the ability to write laws, then that was therefore assumed the others, but now we have executive orders and a variety of other different things and interpretations of the Supreme Court, and we've gotten beyond the intentions. So, which brings up an argument that some people make, which is that should we be beyond the intentions? The Constitution is very hard to amend, and so it has not kept up with the times. And, if it easier to amend, it might have been amended in ways that we don't want. But also it has prevented it from being amended in ways that we do want. So what is the right balance there?
Pete, I think that's the major question for this whole discussion is the understanding, the comparative historical understanding of the founders at the time of the writing of the Constitution, based on their understanding of Greece and Rome and other places, create a foundation for a democratic republic, or simply a republic, then meets our changing times and our changing morals and ideologies. And I would suggest that the most interesting global topic regarding the Federalist is whether or not it's time, regardless of how hard it is, that it's time to at least debate whether or not some fundamental ideas in the Constitution and in the Federalist should be challenged in this day and age. I want to listen to answers on this one.
I would like to hear other people's thoughts as well, because I would say that there's much people right now who are challenging the Constitution and deciding that certain things shouldn't be, but they're just kind of going around the process of amending it. But we also know that the process of amending it is near impossible. So if we can and should, is there a better way to do that? Unilateral, just not observing the Constitution, has its problems.
Yeah, I align with you a bit on that, Pete. I mean, I have friends from varying backgrounds that I talk to a lot, and you hear a lot about upholding the Constitution, but sometimes it's manipulated in ways that they want to uphold the Constitution. But I think the hard work of actually changing it is just really, it's never really on the table. I think it's something people hide behind, right? And then we realize it's too hard. So it's easier to fall back on that, just to say, well, the Constitution says this.
Yeah. And I'll say there's a bunch of people, like, I've seen threads on TikTok and run things of like, let's, get enough people to hold the Constitutional Convention, and then I've also seen stories of conspiracy theories of there's groups that have been working in the background that are just waiting for us to do the convention because they've already got the state legislators put together to be able to send a bunch of delegates to completely wipe away what we have and replace it with something else, and I can certainly believe there's people out there that want to do that. And so who knows what's going to happen if a constitutional convention actually were to happen.
I would add something else. I don't necessarily advocate for a constitutional convention, but I think the issues are so important that we should be having a discussion about the issues, whether or not it gets to a convention.
Mm-hmm.
We need to go back. The title of my manuscript that Routledge is now looking at, Overcoming Historical Amnesia, is actually a lousy title because we haven't forgotten history. We never learned it, which is why it's so important that we're talking about the original documents in this group. There's not enough of that, so I guess I was urging more of a discussion than an actual effort at change.
Yeah. Adam, look like you were about ready to say something.
Well, yeah, I have a couple of thoughts here where, I think we're learning very quickly of the limits of, there's the intents that are of the Constitution that are, very clear, emoluments clauses and separation of powers. And then we're finding that the mechanism to enforce, these high ideals is very hard to implement too. It's oftentimes nothing short of an impeachment will stop some of these activities, and we see that there isn't going to be a will to impeach over the president accepting gifts or something. So I don't know, the way my mind has been going recently, I'm wondering if there would be an opportunity to have an amendment that would have a different mechanism to enforce some of these things. But it's that's more of a fantasy or something. But I don't know. Something like that would have to happen, I think, in order to prevent a slide into autocracy, not necessarily by the current administration or anything, but I think we're learning from what's going on right now that the self checks and balances are not strong enough.
Yeah.
Adam, I absolutely agree with you. I think what I just said and what you just said, I think marry up.
Yeah.
Because if we're having a discussion of what the Constitution says and where faults in it may be, some of it is not necessarily in the Constitution itself, but in the way the institutions that the Constitution set up are failing to do their job.
And I think someone earlier said that the hope was basically the ambitions of the three different branches would be a limiting factor. But if those ambitions are all in alignment with the executive branch, it falls apart, maybe.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now, you had a point in the guide here I'm looking at about anti-federalists, Arnie. And so let's go ahead and pull the anti-federalists into this as well. So even as this was being debated to be put into place, you had Brutus, Article number 1, warning that a large republic is inherently incompatible with liberty, and arguing that distant representatives will fail to reflect the will of the people, and that centralized power will inevitably erode local autonomy. And we've certainly seen that, people spend a lot of times in Washington, and if they don't go back to their local districts, they start to get immersed into the culture of Washington. Then there was the article for Centeno, Article number 1. It's portraying that the proposed Constitution as a blueprint maybe for elite consolidation and systematic corruption, because there was too much placed on the human nature to provide checks and balances, but human nature isn't necessarily built around checks and balances, And I think going back to what you said, Adam, the example to me for that is in order to have not a veto, to get rid of a president, to, I'm blanking on the word. You just said it.
Impeach?
Impeach. There we go. Thank you. In order to impeach, there has to be a trial in the Senate, and that has to be voted on by the Senate with a certain number of votes. And so, I mean, it shouldn't be easy to impeach, but it has nothing to do with the presentation of evidence. You know, if you could make a case and present it, and maybe it was decided by the judiciary, or, you know, or followed some kind of laws that you could do some kind of appeal. But, you know, as we saw in previous attempts just recently, the lack of process is not is was to me astounding. You know, the fact that the Senate could be called to order, not hear any evidence whatsoever, immediately hold a vote, and just whatever people felt was the answer that they wanted to deliver was passed. You know, there was no due process. It wasn't like any other court that we've ever had. And there was no chance for anybody to present their case, either for or against impeachment. We just skipped a trial and went straight to a vote. That's
Right. Yeah, it was explained. I'm probably on NPR that they go through the motion to make it look like a trial, but they have absolutely no reason to do that other than to make it seem more official or legitimate. There's
Mhm.
there's no. It does not have to be a trial at all. To your point.
Yeah. So for some reason that wasn't included. The same process that we have in our courts of law was not written into the Constitution to be applied in the case of impeachment.
Yeah, it'd just be wonderful to have a small set of amendments that would just fill in these cracks a bit. Find other methods, to people accountable, or I think there's even we've even seen with the Supreme Court, the system of lifelong appointments, has this flaw that if enough people die during one administration, some, you can amass quite a bit of power quickly in that branch. Just
Mm-hmm.
as another example,
Mm-hmm.
Let me throw in something here for you to chew on. Don't expect an answer right now. But with the closing down of Colbert and Kimmel and ABC firing them, the venue in which we could have the kind of discussions that happened in Constitution Hall and the kind of discussions that we're having now are going to be more and more limited. And if we can grow this group, maybe we can be part of finding at least a piece of the puzzle of how to expand having these difficult conversations that should be happening all over the country and are increasingly not.
Although I will kind of say that flip sides of everything, do not personally like the idea of the ABC, canceling Kimmel, and I think it was CBS canceling, Colbert. With podcasting, with broadcasting, these guys have voices elsewhere. And they probably reach more of the general American public through those other avenues than they do through ABC or CBS. And they probably were better behaved on ABC and CBS. So taking them off the air for ABC and CBS
Maybe a good thing.
could be a good thing, or at least, it's not really silencing their voice in the same way it used to be when the network television was the only way to get heard.
Good point.
Yeah, I think late night doesn't have the pull it used to. And there are other mediums, because I've heard them have much more impact, I think, again, through podcasting and other realms, rather than waiting till 11:30 at night or 1 a.m. to watch a show. Because it has been a declining art, unfortunately, in a lot of ways, because I grew up on, that kind of late night television, but I think they have other means, and they know that to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, no, just still the pattern of pushing back on voices. Those, maybe that's just the low hanging fruit, and can have a more and more of a chilling effect as he figures out more interesting ways to put pressure on social media, or I don't know, like podcast distribution networks. They're not going to be necessarily as easy as the FCC, but I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I kind of remember, Laura, that growing up, as a kid, I couldn't stay, up late enough to watch any of those types of shows. Then as I got older, I didn't have cable to watch those shows, and various other things. So like, it's not a convenient time for anybody in the first place. And it's a little bit has been gaining a little bit more possibility, like, I'll watch shows the next day on demand. But yeah, like that as a mechanism was already on the downturn. But I think we're heading into a new era of this. Have you guys seen what's been happening in Nepal over the past few weeks?
Yeah, I've been following that, and I happen to have a good friend at work who's from Nepal.
Okay.
And we went out on Tuesday night, and he was a little shocked that an American knew what was going on in Nepal. Um, and he said it was just remarkable. He said, like one little turn in something in the social media, he said, basically click that on. He says his mother still lives there, and I think he might still have a brother there. And he says, all of a sudden, he said there was always this simmering tension,
Uh,
right, between the haves and the have-nots. And all of a sudden, something just pushed it right over the edge, right? They see an Instagram post, they see the Nepo teens, they see and all of a sudden there's an uprising.
mhm.
Um, so just a really interesting turn of events in that country from a group of youths, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, they're
He
calling.
didn't seem surprised. I'll just say
Okay.
that.
Nice. Yeah, that's fascinating to hear from somebody who has been around. I mean, I'll say I guess maybe I should summarize it for the recording and for anybody who's not familiar with it. This is my best understanding of the reports that I have heard, and could be wrong. But so there were different. They basically shut off all social media inside of Nepal, which is one of the first things that started it off. So a lot of they listed as Gen Z generation was out there protesting to get them to turn back on, because they had control over internet for the entire country, to just shut off social media. And so they were protesting about this, and so the government unleashed the military on the protesters, which ended up in I don't know how many deaths there were, but I know that there was one very important death that was the tipping point. And so there was one of the protesters that was killed by the military forces as part of this protest, and the whole group just flipped. And so they just moved over to taking over and shutting down the government. And then I heard stories after that where, yes, they were attacking and there was looting and they were setting places on fire. But then some of the reports that are coming out are saying what they were doing was they would announce ahead of time, this building is going down, get everybody out. Then the protesters would sweep through the building and make sure that everybody was out, and even help to get everybody out before they set the fires to make things happen. And then they would go back around and they track down all of the looters, who had robbed all the various different businesses, collected all of the loot. They got like these videos and showing these pictures of things where they were collecting and bringing back all of the stuff that was looted back to the businesses. So at each step along the way, they are taking a different response than I think we have ever seen in the world. And in the midst of all of this, like they evacuated all of the office holders, the legislators, and then the Gen Z set up a Discord server where they held their own debates for candidates that they wanted to see, and then set up and executed their own vote for who they wanted to be their prime minister. And so they voted through Discord, and they picked a woman. I forget what her name is. I'd have to look it up. And so now that is the person that is being held up as to take over as the prime minister for Nepal moving forward. And then a few days ago, the military backed down and decided to support this person who was elected through Discord. So those are the extent of the things that I know, but there's just been this variety of, each of the different problems that come up in the government and how they addressed it. The problems that come from doing a violent overthrow of a company or of a country and how they addressed it. The attention to the safety of life and the safety of property and respect of property has really been a different thing that we've never seen before, I think.
Good summary, thank you.
Which I think is also interesting. I know less about France, but France also went up in flames for their new prime minister being installed. And it does not sound like France handled the situation the same way that the Gen Z in Nepal did.
That's an excellent summary. I'd seen a couple of headlines, but hadn't heard the whole story. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Looking at the time here, shall we talk about executive power? All right, so in Alexander Hamilton in Federalist number 70 makes a vigorous case for a strong, energetic executive. He's also a bit on the record. He really wanted Washington to be an elected king and advocated for that and was kind of overruled for that and ended up with the executive branch. So it's not surprising to me that Hamilton was advocating for a very strong executive branch. And his argument was that a single executive, one person instead of a council, will ensure decisiveness, accountability, and effective administration. And in Federalist number 69, Hamilton attempts to calm fears by comparing the president's powers to those of a monarch, emphasizing the constitutional limits. There is no hereditary succession, there's no unilateral war powers, and a dependence on Congress for funding and declarations. So from Hamilton's perspective, he felt that they had built in enough checks and balances that you could have an elected king or at least an elected executive that is revisited every 4 years because they do not have the right to do various different tasks. So that was Hamilton's view. I don't know that I share the same view as he did. But I think they were very immersed in a world like at that time, almost nobody ran on democracies. Everybody had a monarchy. They're just so used to it. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm going to stop right there because I want to hear what everybody else has to say.
My first thought was my ears peaked up when there was the hope that, he'll be checked in terms of war powers. And it just turns out that Congress, in theory, in very specific terms, is the only one that's supposed to be able to start wars, and yet we've had 3 or 4 wars, maybe more, depending on how you count them, where Congress completely abdicated that responsibility. And there are these ways in which maybe the checks that Hamilton assumed would be there have already faded. Anyway.
Adam, I think that's a really important point. And I would add, in addition to war, there's assassinations, coup d'etat, and regime change. And President Obama ex-President Obama just let one slip the other day in an interview when he said their president is not as powerful as you think he is. There's rooms in the White House that he's not allowed to go into.
Huh.
Huh, that's interesting.
And if you want to follow this, the guy that the macroeconomist at Columbia, Jeffrey Sachs, speaks on these issues eloquently all the time, and he's a major advisor of the UN. He was the economist that advised Gorbachev. He knows every major player in the world since the 1960s, and you can often find him lecturing on Google or some other platform. I follow him very closely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think while the president does not have an opportunity to declare war, there is a very particular definition of that which has allowed different administrations to take a lot of actions in other countries to change the way that that country functions. And as long as they don't declare war, it sort of escapes its loophole in that definition, because they do have rights over foreign policy. But that's a lot of things that foreign powers are upset with us about, of influencing their elections and influencing things that have happened in their country without declaring war. So where is the boundary between protecting our interests and allowing other sovereign countries to protect their interests?
I'll just throw in that the foremost American political scientist today is John Mearsheimer, and he has his theory of offensive realism in foreign policy is the foreign policy side of the neoliberal policy on domestic policy, and his advice has been closely followed for decades now, that each sovereign state has the right to protect and project its own interests, and it's up to the other states to rebut, defend, or collaborate. And I would argue that we would be in a much better place if we kept stronger, if we rejected much of realistic offensive realism and going more toward the collaborative side of the USAID, the United States Institute of Peace, in even a more Quaker point of view toward making a more collaborative world. Just to go way out on the limb here, I do not think it was necessary to turn China into an enemy. Just to be a little provocative.
I had a conversation with a libertarian over the weekend, and was talking about personal liberties, and he listed out two things about freedom of personal liberty and choice, but also consent. And I had that question with him about, well, what if, the things that somebody wants to do causes problems for somebody else? And he pointed back and he's like, well, that for me is the consent part. that, your desire or want to do things, if it affects other people, in his point of view, that person also had to have the consent to participate in it, to make that happen. And that was part of the checks and balances for him, that if you're doing it just for yourself, you should have the liberty and freedom to do whatever you want for yourself. But as soon as that affects other people, then consent comes into play. And I thought that was a fair point, and I liked the way that at least he was applying it in our conversations.
I love the way Oliver Wendell Holmes put that point. He says, "You write stop when they approach my nose."
Yep.
Yeah, that would be for me is where is the boundary, right? Of how you make that decision of where it impacts you.
Yeah.
I think about a lot of, I don't care if you smoke, if you want to smoke pot, great. But when I get a little nervous when I smell your pot out on the beltway, you know what I mean? Because then you're making me, you're sort of taking that and you're impacting me in some way, right? If you were smoking
Yeah.
it at home or in your backyard, but now you might be impaired and you're out on the road.
Mm-hmm. That is true. I'm trying to think of how to say this without getting into spoilers, because I really like The Good Place.
Don't say too
And
much because I've never watched it and I've been thinking about watching it.
oh, you should definitely watch it. You should definitely watch it. It takes
Yeah,
a
I've
while to
heard
get
good.
into it. It's a great story arc, and I'm
Yeah.
going to say as little as I possibly can.
Well, say it just enough because I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, Good Place it was a show on NBC, and it's about these characters who die and end up in the afterlife. And I'll stop at that, but it is one of the best written shows I think I've seen in quite a while, both from a comedy perspective as well as sort of a spiritual and overarching kind of perspective, and it just gives a lot of really great. I see Adam agrees. He's given the celebration emoji there. And they get into a plot at some point, trying to say this as delicately as possible, about how over time, there were fewer people, it's probably the best way to say it, when we were fewer people on the planet, it was much easier to have our own freedoms without affecting somebody else. But these days, and over time and over history, you almost can't do anything without having some effect on somebody else, which makes it a lot harder to be able to apply that idea of personal freedoms paired with consent.
I hit the wrong button. I didn't mean to send that many thumbs up.
So, all right, we had another point in here about the Anti-Federalists, bring them into the executive power section. So, in Cato, articles numbers 4 and 5, there's a warning that the presidency, as designed, does carry the seeds of monarchy, and the president's control over the military, the power to pardon, and the ability to appoint officials are all mechanisms that could be exploited to consolidate power. And then in Brutus, article number 4, there's an argument made that the president's command of the armed forces and influence over appointments makes him dangerously independent of the people and of the Congress. And I think I think about a lot of those same things myself. Yes, the Congress is only allowed to stipulate the funds for funding the military in the war, but then after that point, all the execution is held by the president, irrelevant of their military experience. Now they have advisors and they have people to go through, but there's a chain of command. and we have checks and balances that you're not supposed to follow a order that is illegal or that is not unconstitutional. But sometimes in the midst of battle, in the midst of a situation, does the person know? How could the person know whether or not is legal or illegal? It requires a level of knowledge of the soldier over local law, international law, national law, and the Constitution to be able to make that distinction. And I think that puts an undue burden on the soldier to be constitutional or to be the.
I would add to that, Pete, that if the population does not know the Constitution, hasn't read the Federalist Papers, and don't know what the legal constraints are, then if they believe in the authority of the president, then there are no bounds.
Yep. Yep. And if they have historical amnesia, as you were fond of saying, then they also are not going to know how to determine what is and is not in bounds.
Yep.
I've been having another conversation with people that I think feeds into it, which is that your source of information right now, I think, decides a lot of what's going on. So I've had a lot of different debates and talking about various different things, and people are bringing up, well, have you heard about this? And here's this source over here. Oh, well, have you heard about that? Or this source is over here. Oh, no, I didn't. I had no idea that was going on. I didn't know that was a thing. And when you don't have that certain pieces of information, something can seem completely logical and completely lawful. But then you get another piece of information that maybe is being withheld from you, or is just not available to you, and you just haven't come across it yet. And without that piece of information, then something completely different could seem entirely logical and lawful. So access to knowledge can also just really tear this down.
And it's not just access. I think it is curiosity, right? And openness to I do think a lot of it is access, but I think there's also an openness and a curiosity that people have to have, and a willingness to maybe look at things they may not want to hear, right? Or they may not want to confront,
Mm-hmm.
right?
No.
Yeah, I had a very interesting, one of the things is I had a friend and she was talking about her daughter, and I guess her daughter's more in that sort of Gen Z, and she says, "Oh, they're so accepting." And I said, I my experience has been, because my nieces and nephews are sort of in the same realm, and I said, granted, it's just my experience. I think they're accepting as long as you agree with them, right? The moment you disagree, then it becomes this, you're wrong, and I'm going to convince you why you're wrong. And I've had a couple of conversations like this with my nephew, because all I was asking for, I said, I just want to see more information on the topic. And once I kind of got him there, he was like, oh, okay. And now, of course, I'm getting bombarded with articles and studies and this. And I'm like, this is great. This is all I want to see. I want to have an open dialogue about, I don't need you to come in full bore and tell me I'm wrong. I need you to kind of show me some stuff and convince me that I might need to rethink or reconsider my perspective. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you do. I think you have to have sort of an openness to have those conversations. So it's access and curiosity and a willingness to have some hard conversations.
Laura and Adam, watch Pete cringe, because I bet he can predict what I'm going to say now. Can you? What's the first word I'm going to start with, Pete?
I don't actually know where you're going, but I'm stealing myself for it.
Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge.
Mm.
That imagination of kids that are playing like we used to in the streets and get curiosity and learn stuff turn out to be the Nobel Prize winners that created CRISPR. Back under George Bush too, we went to teach to the test, which kills every principle that John Dewey ever had about education. It kills imagination. It stifles imagination. It says knowledge is more important than curiosity, and it stops the critical thinking process that's required of active participants in a democratic society.
Yeah, that wasn't cringeworthy for me. I'd agree. I think there's trade-offs and balances, going back to a little bit of what you were saying before, Laura, about in the network, or rather, my brain's taking it. It used to be that there was one general news source. We had a limited thing. We had standards for journalism. We had standards on nonpartisan delivery of the news. It was like a big thing that, anybody who was a news broadcaster, you never knew what their political affiliation was or how they voted, based upon principle. And if you were to bring in there's what they call it, the Fairness Act or something like that, that if you brought on one point of view, you had to bring on the other point of view, to make sure that all the different sides of the issue were being heard. And because we only had a few stations, most of the country got the same news in this kind of straightforward, balanced kind of format. And the flip side is that now we do have to kind of figure it out for ourselves, which is good in some way. So in the old system, there wasn't a way to get access to the information. There wasn't a way to think critically. And so that was never really asked of people. The news person was going to do all the critical thinking and the research for you. Now we are encouraging and giving access in ways for more people to do their own research and to learn to do their own critical thinking themselves. But that is a more tumultuous kind of situation. And so by losing one, we've gained the other, but that's also brought in additional problems that didn't exist in the previous system.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. We once had more of a collective consciousness, right? Like we all watched the same shows or we heard the same things almost every night. We could all think about it and talk about it when we went to school or work or whatever the next day. And now everybody's so bombarded with all these different sources. It's much more difficult, and you filter things based sometimes on what you want to hear or what you don't want to hear, right? And it requires a lot more. And, sort of taking this back a little bit to a monarchy, I think, as we were talking about the beginning of the conversation, is that I've always contended a little bit that monarchies are always in place because it makes it easy, right? That somebody could just say, well, the king said, or the queen said, or whatever. You don't have to always have as much critical thinking. It's easy. And I understand that. I don't judge people for that. It makes life much easier for you. The decision's made, I can just live with it. Right?
Yeah. Taking it back to the Federalist Papers and the Constitution, it was Madison that talked about the difficulty of managing, using force to impose order over dissonance, as opposed to creating mechanisms that would create unified thought. And he said the attempt to control the kind of destructive dissonance would kill liberty, and the cure is worse than the disease. So it's an ongoing problem that the founders knew about and tried to resolve.
I've been writing about these. I've started a blog series I call Democracy 364. And the general premise is that most of us only experience democracy one day out of the year, and the other 364 days of the year we live and work in monarchies. So we don't really know the difference. And so it's one of the things I've been laying out in the various different articles and talking about systems that I'm seeing inside of starting to emerge in corporate America, of what I'm labeling as like a democracy 3.0 version of it. democracy 1.0 being a direct democracy, 2.0 being a republic, and then this is a new version of allowing democracy at scale through constructs. And some of the constructs I see are identifying problems to be solved and focusing on problem solving instead of passing laws and implementing solutions. Then there is also the difference between having a plan that you just automatically execute versus making a hierarchy or an order of problems and knowing which problems should not get worse in light of solving other problems. And so that's one of the things I've been doing with the Forward Party, is doing exercises around prioritized problems for that reason. Since we are in a world where it's very hard to do something in isolation without making somebody else's life harder, the more that we recognize those differences, the better off we're going to be, or those impacts and the follow-on impacts of it. And the third thing that I see is the ability to create metrics and data around the problems, not the solutions. A lot of time we're collecting metrics around, hey, we have this law, hey, we have this thing, are we following the law, are we getting this stuff? And we may be doing exactly what we planned to do, but the problem still exists and it never went away. And we sort of lost sight of what we were trying to get away from because we're so focused on the law and the solution that we're trying to implement. And so I find that when you take those three things and you're putting them together, of listening to the people being affected, prioritizing the problems there, and establishing metrics around those problems, now you instantly have much better checks and balances, at least in a corporate environment, for different decisions. And so we have many different monarchies, but when they're subject to solving actual problems, being able to prove that they're solving those problems, and you're responsible for listening to everybody around them, employees and leaders and peers and vendors and customers, and really actually solving problems for people. I think there's just it gives us a new space because so many people are just so used to monarchies. So we don't have a way right now to keep monarchy in check.
I absolutely agree with you, and let me give you a little historical background. After World War II, Frederick Hayek, Milton Friedman, Arthur Betz Laffer took a look at what had happened in Germany and what was happening in Russia, and they decided that what I would call a radical individualism that was expressed best by Margaret Thatcher, who said there is no such thing as society. They decided that it was the individual, rational individual in an unregulated market who create the best of all possible worlds. In fact, Hayek, in The Road to Serfdom, argued with the sociologist of knowledge, Karl Mannheim, who said that the only way we can move forward is to basically do something like what Keynes had advocated, that you need the kind of data that you're talking about. You need social diagnosis so that you have the data that you need to see where the problems are, and then to do strategic planning and to evaluate and do continuing Deming-like evaluations and adjustments. And Milton Friedman won. He created the liberal and the neoliberal ideology that went from the attempt to create a managerial economy to what the Greek economic minister Varoufakis calls techno-barons who created techno serfs in an entrepreneurial economy, and it's that set of policies that Hayek and Friedman put into place that is the resistance that you're getting to what we need to make the change. You're talking about the change that we need, and thankfully it's growing. but that needs a lot of care, a lot of water, and a lot of talking about and exposure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot of oppression and corruption under communist rule, and there was a reaction to it, of let's not make that happen again. I was talking with somebody else last month, and they were talking about, the Hitler, and Hitler's domain was under a socialist government, and that one of my issues with communism, socialism, is that it actually makes it easier for monarchy, and so that's why I'm trying to change. That's why I'm trying to change the conversation here, that it's not about communism or socialism. It's about whether or not the system allows you to consolidate power into a small group of people to dominate over an area. And anytime that you have any kind of a system that makes that possible, you're going to have trouble.
I think the enemy is the neoliberal and liberal idea. The title of Hayek's book was The Road to Serfdom, and he argued that the kind of planning that you're talking about was the road to serfdom. And I think, ironically, it's the neoliberal and liberal ideas that have taken us to what Varoufakis calls techno-serfdom.
I feel like I want to distinguish, just for the recording, that neoliberal is not the same thing as liberals and leftists, and that neoliberal in that definition has to do with that personal liberties, and the idea that everybody should have to have a personal liberty, to do what is in their best interests, and that's the liberalism part of that. Has nothing to do with liberals in the terms of left versus right.
I think it has to do with there is a similarity between them that eliminates the kind of regulation necessary when you get the problem that came up in the Constitution, in the Federalist Papers, when talent and ambition so unbalances the institutions of society that any kind of republic or democracy becomes less possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I'll migrate us over to separation of powers and checks and balances, our last topic here, in that it's not natural. I think natural would be getting to more of a monarchy structure. The idea of people, like, I don't see an inherent problem with capitalism, but free reign capitalism just makes for the ability to have monarchy show up. Whereas I've spent a lot of time in the conscious capitalism space, and I've seen some very good things done in a capitalist way. And again, it's all these different government structures, for me, in my point of view, that aren't inherently good or bad themselves, except when they open up the door for monarchy thinking and that I am more important than you. And as soon as we have that, without a check and balance to bring those powers back into check and prevent, any one small group from becoming more important and having more and more than another group, that starts to be the power of that. So,
Pete, can I tell you a quick story that we're in agreement on that? What I said before and what you said are not in disagreement. We may have to find a path to it, but a quick story. The Mayflower colonists started out with regimented farming. They thought that would be more productive if they planned it and worked together. And it turned out that they almost starved to death. Mm-hmm. So in the next winter, they divided up the plots. Individual initiative did its magic, and they had enough food for the winter. So there's plenty of historical evidence for capitalism. But the question is the balance between the fruits of individual initiative and the ability to create at least a minimal kind of existence for for the rest of us? Where is that balance, and what institutions do we need to keep that? And if the institutions created by the Constitution and argued by the Federalist Papers, do they achieve that balance for us, or do we have to rethink it?
Mm-hmm. So let me lay out our conversation starters here. So James Madison in Federalist numbers 47, 48, and 51 lays out the architecture for the separation of powers. He acknowledges mere declarations of separation are not sufficient, that the branches must be given the constitutional tools to resist encroachments of one branch on the other. The goal is not rigid isolation, but dynamic tension, that there should be a tension between the branches, and each branch should actively guard its own prerogatives and seek to remain independent. And so for this system, Madison argues it's essential to preserving liberty in a government where you have people who are, I guess his phrasing was, if we were a government, if we were all angels, we wouldn't need a government, but we are not. So therefore, we need these different structures and things, and this dynamic tension to keep us in balanced.
Speak for yourself. I am an angel.
And you don't have to chime in, Adam, but it's been a while since we heard your voice, so I just want to make sure you got some space. And Adam may have fallen asleep, or maybe he's having dinner. It's been a long day at work, huh, Adam?
You got anything to add?
I was not within arm's reach of my phone. I was like, oh, that's the worst moment. No,
At just that time, we started talking about you.
but I'm still here. Yeah. Right. I have no particular comment to add other than I'm here, and this is a wonderful conversation.
Okay, no worries. Let me put in the anti-federalist thing. So in Brutus number 15, focuses on the judiciary and arguing that the lifetime appointments and the vague powers do make the judges unaccountable and prone to expanding or abusing their influence. Old Whig number 5 critiques the Constitution a little bit more broadly and suggests that the national government is too powerful and that the proposed checks are insufficient to prevent government and overreach. And the anti-federalists were hoping that there was more of a separation to require explicit constraints, shorter terms, and more mechanisms for direct public oversight, that even if we weren't going to go into a direct democracy, that there should be more of a direct oversight of what's happening inside of government. So I see some of these sentences inside of like Brutus number 15, Old Whig number 5. And I'm like, yeah, they already saw this. Things we're dealing with right now, they already saw it before the Constitution was even in place. Just may have taken a while for it to show up, although you could make the argument that we've gone through cycles. We've had times in the past where the Supreme Court has made decisions that we look back on now and have since been reversed. And we're like, how could they ever have come to that decision? But time is also a check and a balance. And as long as we can continue to have new voices come in, we always have a chance to be able to undo anything that did not work correctly in the past.
And let me throw in a little recent history. In 1951 or 53, I forget which, Russell Kirk wrote Mind of a Conservative. And he saw the abundance of Keynesian economics coming out of World War II and FDR's policies. as creating a too strong middle class that would have too much of a majoritarian impact on government. And so he advocated at that point, America was 60% middle class. And he advocated the policies that will reduce that, which in fact have happened. In 1973, Lewis Powell, who was to become a Supreme Court justice, wrote a memo backed by the Koch brothers to the top corporate leaders in the United States, arguing that the corporations and the wealthy needed to have more influence in the creation of law and in the judicial decisions. I would argue that Powell was strongly influenced by Friedman and Laffer and carried their ideology with him into the court. It was Powell, above all others, who led the decision that led to Citizens United, which made corporations people and money speech. And so I would make the argument, or the question for us to discuss: did some of the ideology contained in the Federalist Papers go on in the public consciousness, especially in certain classes of American society, and remain today in effect in the decisions that the Supreme Court are making? They're still being influenced by that protection of private property against the ambitions of the less talented.
I know somebody who was actually involved in the court case around Citizens United, and who was sharing a couple points in there just on the legal standpoint, which was it had already been established for quite a while in case law that corporations were treated as people. And so Citizens United didn't make that distinction from a legal standpoint. But it was making a standpoint that the intention of Citizens United, I think this is the best way to maybe describe this if I'm doing it justice, was that when you get together as a corporation and as a collection of people, you shouldn't lose your rights as people because you're acting as a corporation. And so the intention was to extend the rights of people through the actions that they also take as a corporation. And then the unintended consequence, as I understand it, was not supposed to be that direct dollars represented voice, and that the spending happened on that. But the law was written in such a way, or was interpreted in such a way, or the judgment was interpreted in such a way that all of a sudden it became this thing where you could now spend unlimited dollars, and the dollars equated to, and that was the big change under Citizens United, was not the conversion of corporations as people, but the conversion of dollars to speech.
And the impact thereof has been the neutering of Congress because of the unlimited contributions.
Has equated wealth with power.
Yes.
But I think you brought up an interesting point there when we're talking about people feel a need to speak through some other mechanism, right? Because their individual power might be mitigated, right? I sat in a Montgomery County Council meeting the other evening, and I heard a young man get up and he said, all of you are talking through committees, right? You have a stronger voice, right? This council is going to pay more attention to you because you're bringing something to the committee that you probably have more power to re-elect them. You have more voice. And I'm just one lone citizen. So I just think that's an interesting point that you've raised there. Kind of maybe unintentionally, but it's just right that people might feel this need. And I think that's a natural thing, right? We want to get behind a group. because we want to feel like we have that power. And we're always told, oh, well, you all have a voice. But it really is the power in numbers that sometimes makes a bigger difference.
I'm gonna talk against myself now with a different example from Alexei de Tocqueville, who, when he went through America in the 1830s, said that one of the most remarkable things about freedom, liberty in the United States was that so many social problems were taken care of by voluntary associations for barn raising. People would come together and put up the barn. And something has happened through the housing policies, transportation policies, and other policies that have disrupted the power of the voluntary associations that used to function as the corporations in us, that they have gotten together to increase their power and influence and authority through unified speech. The people used to have that through the voluntary associations, and somehow we've destroyed that. Am I wrong?
From my perspective, comes up in a slightly different version of it, but similar, I think, which is that I have a lot of issues with laws that pass regulations that say you cannot do something. You get enough power in there, and people are, large corporations are passing laws saying that the public cannot do something that is against my interests as a company. And that prevention, I think, is causing so much strife. At the same time, if we go back to our thing about consent, there are things that are happening in our world by corporations or by people that are causing non-consented trouble for other people. And so having a law in place that prevents you from disrupting somebody else, I can see how it makes sense. But when it stifles innovation or it stifles our ability to do things, there's just something wrong with that. An example that pops in my head as I'm talking about it is the story of what was it called? The EV something. There was like a electric car back in, I think it was the 90s.
Yes, yeah.
That was created. It wasn't sold, it was leased. It was super popular. And then one or more of the corporations got together, basically bought the company that owned the licenses for it, collected all the cars from people's homes, trashed them, compacted them, and just got rid of them. So there was nothing wrong with it. The people wanted the cars. There was a market for it. There was expanding. The technology worked. But somebody just made a choice that we were not going to have EV cars. And they used the law to shut down other people's opportunity to participate in something that they voluntarily wanted to participate in.
There's an earlier example of that in the early 1900s, when California was well on its way to a wonderful system of mass transit. And the automobile industry, the rubber industry, the tire industry, the glass industry, and the steel industry all got together and bought out the public transportation, rail and trolley and so on in California, and created all of that now by automobile and truck, which then later led to Eisenhower and the interstate highway system, which then led to all of the to Levittown and bedroom communities. So a whole series of these cascading events that Yago called the corporate car complex from the early 20s up to today have helped destroy the voluntary associations that we're talking about because of the way they've divided us physically.
Hmm.
I'm talking too much. You're supposed to moderate me.
I think we've been pretty balanced throughout the night, so happy about that.
Oh, that was perfect. Yeah.
Was that what you were going to say, Adam?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that felt exactly the right length. Yeah, it was good.
Except that we need more of Adam's voice in here. No, just kidding.
I am distracted at home, I'm afraid, but
I would agree.
So, but I think that's, you know, I guess, actually, I want to expand on that. We need more voices in general.
Yes.
You know, the more place to bring in and do this. It's what I do in the corporate world as well. You know, I'm always setting up a construct of communities of practice whenever I can. You know, one team figures something out and does it and then shares it with the other teams. So that the other teams, you know, they may be thinking about doing the same thing. And they don't realize that there's going to be these challenges and these ups and these downs. And if they never hear about it, they may make the exact same mistakes that could have been preventable. You know, or they may have a new idea that builds on top of that, makes it even better. But it's only when we try out a bunch of different ideas and we get to try them out in a different context. We're not prevented from trying something new, but we have to come back and report on it and say how it went, good or bad, that we move forward as a larger collective, whether that be a community or a company.
You opened the door for me, Pete. So I proudly and happily announce that my manuscript, Overcoming Historical Amnesia, looking at recurring factors and patterns at historical turning points from the major transition from hunting and gathering to agriculture, under the title Overcoming Historical Amnesia, is now under consideration for publication by Routledge.
Congratulations.
Wow.
Thank you.
I know how hard it is to shop a book around, so congratulations. That's a slog.
Okay.
All right, fingers crossed.
Thank you.
I know it's not over yet, so.
No, there's no contract. But Mike and I the publisher and I have a really good relationship. And I'm very hopeful.
Good.
It's quick. If you havenent read Václav Havel's poem on hope, it's got a favorite sentiment of mine, and it applies here. It's hope above all that defeats pessimism.
I am definitely not going to do this justice. But I was talking, or no, I wasn't talking. I was listening to somebody talking. It was coming from the African American perspective, and was talking about when you have access to things and you have choices, you can know whether or not things turn out because you have experience of them getting better.
Yeah.
But when you don't have access to choices, the only thing you have left is hope.
Okay, and speaking of choices, as we come to, within 2 minutes of 8:30, we should talk about what we want to read next. And I would suggest that we go one more session on the Federalist Papers and read the excerpt that I sent you, Pete, about the complaint of the colonists against the hegemony of the British, and how they had divided the world up into 3 or 4 different Africa and Asia and Europe and the Americas in 44 different places, and that the policy and effects of Britain were to expropriate the resources from those places with no regard for the devastation that they were leaving. And Jeffrey Sachs would argue that at some point America picked up that tradition as becoming to say it not as the world's peacemaker, but maybe the world's hegemon. And that exact analysis is in one of the Federalist paper excerpts that I sent you. I forget which Federalist paper it is. And what's happening now in Africa, the Africa Unity movement under Burkina Faso, are saying exactly the same thing that we were saying about the British. And I find that absolutely fascinating. So if that would be my suggestion for the next topic, but I'm open to whatever the group wants to do.
So let's take a quick poll here, just amongst, so people are here and have come back, and we've been doing Federalist Papers. I think this is session 3, 2, 3, 3. So have we done enough on this, and you kind of like to see something else, or are you like, we're just cracking this thing open, and there's so much more that I want to look at? And either one, you could also vote for both. You ready to move on, or are you ready to go deeper?
I would lean towards ready to move on, but I am open to doing, I'd be okay with one more if that is what everybody agrees to. But I wouldn't mind moving on, particularly since I think I had recommended originally the Federalist Papers, where I'd been the initial vote, and then I feel like I've been doing it all summer, frankly.
I'm fine with anything that we want. I'm open to anything.
Yeah, I mean, it would be almost nice if we could revisit it, like we could always come back to it at some point too, with maybe some other perspectives, right?
Yeah.
That's an option as well.
Adam.
And this is just, yes or no, it's just I was going to say that I should abstain because this is basically my first Minotaur book club, at least that I can recall. And I find this interesting in this topic, but I'm sure there will be other interesting topics after Federalist Papers as well.
I will say I don't have any other suggestion. So if we do it for another month, I'm fine.
I would like to stay if we switch to something else to the because of the overcoming amnesia, to stick with the founding documents. One of which would be Common Sense by Thomas Paine, which is really well written and short.
I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
I like this founding fathers type of theme we've been doing.
Can we find a founding mother?
I don't think so. Not for a while. Unfortunately.
Oh,
right.
Common Sense sounds great to me.
Okay. So we went from being angels to devil's advocate, and now we're going to go around to Common Sense.
Why do we call it common sense when it's not so common?
All right. I'm okay with that as well.
I ask, Adam and Laura, are you happy with the format? Would you want to see any other changes?
No, this is working for me. I really like the fact that we come in with an agenda. I appreciate, Adam, you reaching out and saying, what are we going to be talking about? Because I was thinking the same thing. And I have to admit, I kind of had to go back because it had been a while since I had looked at some of these. So I like this because I think we're sort of interweaving history with common day, and for that I'm much appreciative.
Yeah, and I find that I have a desire to make it accessible, that if you haven't had a chance to read it, you can still be an effective, participant in this. So again, appreciation to you, Arnie, for putting together this outline agenda and the notes to get us kicked off and started and hit some of the highlights on it. And then that just gives us places where we can start to make some conversations on it, given our own expertise with the current day, even if we aren't as familiar with the writings, the original writing.
And one request, since I sneakily, as we started this, I sort of tilted it toward information that I have to do anyway for my manuscript. I would urge you all to critique me as hard as you possibly can, because I need that.
All right. So Arnie has thrown down the gauntlet. So
When is our next meeting? Because this one was a little delayed. Yes.
yeah, we took a month off because we had a lot of different travels and different things. Let's look at the calendar real quick. Normally it would be the second Thursday. We also had to postpone last week for conflicts. So that would put us at October 9th. Just for everybody that's here right now, is that good for you?
Works for me.
Okay. Double checking. Oh, Adam, you and I might have a conflict.
It's worse than that. I'm going to a burn. So whatever else you had. I know it's also Potomac Day, right? So
Do you want to push a week?
Yeah, maybe go to the 3rd. So how does October 16th look for folks?
That's actually probably a little bit better for me. I could do the 9th, but the 16th is better.
Works for me.
How about you, Adam?
yeah, that works actually good.
Okay, then we'll go just about exactly a month from now. So we'll go to the 3rd Thursday.
And it's common sense.
Common sense to go to the 3rd Thursday. All right, cool. Well, thanks everybody for being here, being part of another good, interesting discussion. I like to be able to chat about these different things and appreciate having other brains to chat about them with.
Me too.
Agreed. Nice to be with you all.
Absolutely.
Have a good one.
You too.
Take care.
Too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.